Clean and simple cards continue to be a very popular card design category. However, making them is a challenge for many crafters. In this perfect pairing, let's dive into one very simple rule for balanced, clean, and simple compositions. Luckily for us, the perfect pairing that I decided on today is really easy to pick. So the Altenew July Paint a Flower and the Altenew August 1st Build a Flower are actually the same flower, so I decided to make this perfect pairing really easy and put these two flowers together on my clean and simple card arrangement. So if you're not familiar with either of these subscription services, the Paint a Flower subscription service comes out on every 22nd of the month. And then the Build a Flower layering stamp set comes out on every 1st of the month. So this was the July 22nd, 2021, and the August 1st, 2021 Fashion Monger Dahlia. I'll set aside these two floral stamp sets for just a moment. I make all my cards in a portrait orientation in 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, and I've already made a cut in this because one of my secrets to composition rules on clean and simple cards is to just simply follow the rule of thirds. And rule of thirds really indicates a placement sort of grid for your focal points. But in this case, I've used the rule of thirds as a surface area filler on my card front. So I have a rough template for my A2 card front in the portrait orientation. So I've cut just a scrap piece of A2 sized white cardstock just to illustrate the rule of thirds on this. If you were to make one of your own, so I just have my A2 size card front, and I've made a cut here at 1 7/8 or roughly 2 inches. And as you can see, the area of this scrap piece here, or this 1/3 piece that I've cut off, is roughly 1/3 of the entire surface area of my card front. But for now, I'm going to use this as a template to organize my focal points on my card front. Now, clean and simple, or CAS cards, as they're typically abbreviated, contain a lot of white space, very few embellishments, and are typically one layer. So you can stamp it directly onto your card front or your pre-folded card base here, but I still like to work in panels. So what I will use my 4 1/4 by 1 7/8 inch guideline is to plan the amount of surface area I want my stamps to occupy on my card panel. So for my 4 1/4 and 1 7/8 inches template here, I can overlay the photopolymer stamps onto my template to just get a rough idea of the surface area that these stamps occupy. So in this case, I know that part of the Paint a Flower image, so maybe about halfway or 1/3 of the way up, plus the floral image from Build a Flower is going to roughly occupy the surface area of 1/3 of my card front. So keeping that in mind, I can start arranging my 1-layer floral arrangement using the Build a Flower and Paint a Flower images. So now that I know this, I can start working on my card front. And like I mentioned earlier, I like working directly on panels. The first thing I want to do is make a mask of the outline image from Build a Flower Fashion Monger Dahlia. So I have a scrap piece here of the Altenew masking paper. So I will stamp this outline image directly onto the stamping side of the Altenew masking paper. So I've stamped 2 images onto my masking paper here. I have one mask image for the full Build a Flower outline image. And then I have a second image here partially stamped just for the center flower petals on the main image. Like all Build a Flower stamp sets, there is a coordinating die, but in this case I'm just going to opt to fussy cut this image. So here are my images, my cut images for the collarette type dahlia. So that's the center cluster of petals and then the main outline as well. And now I can double check this against my templates, again, my 1/3 rule template, and transfer that sort of surface area that this main flower cluster image occupies and transfer that onto my card fronts. And I know also the temptation is to stamp your image right into the middle for cleaning simple cards. And while that's fine, and you can create beautifuls and clean and simple cards that way, I like to experiment a lot with interesting combinations and compositions. So something that's stamped a little bit into the corner or up and over to the side a little bit is also very visually interesting. So I'm doing a little bit of planning right now, trying to see how much of the larger paint a flower cluster to occupy my card front, keeping in mind the 1/3 surface area, as well as the mask for the build a flower image, just to see how I want to arrange all these flowers without sort of losing a lot of elements from both images. So I think I like this sort of arrangement. I can still see the other two paint a flower colorette dahlias peeping out underneath from the build a flower dahlia here. This is just slightly excessive according to the template, but I like using this as a guideline to sort of force myself to use even less for clean and simple cards. So now I know roughly where I'm going to stamp the build a flower dahlia, and then about where my placement of the paint a flower dahlia outline image clusters are going to go. So I will first start with the build a flower image on my card front, or my card panel here. According to that template, I had my flower around this area of my card. And I'll be using a stamp positioning tool and following the basic instructions of the Build a Flower Fashion Monger Dahlia trifold. So that's the layering guide found within the inside of your product. I'll start with the outline image in permanent black, crisp ink. Once this outline image has dried back a bit, I'll use the inner petal mask image to mask off these inner petals on my stamped image. I'll grab the A2 or most solid layer image, and I want to preserve as much of that fuchsia characteristic that I see in reference images for Fashion Monger Dahlia. So I'm going to grab the Spring Bouquet bundle in the mini cube set in baby pink, and use a mini ink blending tool to blend and diffuse this ink layer so that I have a soft transition between all my layers. And this is something I do quite a lot on my Perfect Pairings and any of my layering flower images. Moving on to the A3 layer, I'll move on to fuchsia in the Spring Bouquet bundle. And then onto the A4 layer, or most detailed layer, I'm going to use magenta crisp ink to ink blend and diffuse this layer. So, moment of truth, I'll remove my mask here using the Altenew tweezers. And there we go. So I've left quite a large white area in the center of the flower. So now that I have my main focal point stamped on my card front, I'll use the mask that I made for the outline and mask this image off. And now I'm bringing in the Paint a Flower outline image and overlaying this on my card front, keeping in mind that arrangement I pre-planned for earlier. And I will use the same permanent black crisp ink to stamp the outline image for Paint a Flower Fashion Monger Dahlia. So once I have a clean impression of the outline image, I'll go ahead and use my Altenew tweezers again to remove the mask. So that is the main focus to my clean and simple card front. Now all it needs is a sentiment. I thought since I spotlight colored this one flower on this image, I thought the one-of-a-kind sentiment on the Paint a Flower Fashion Monger Dahlia is quite fitting for this card front. I'm using that same Spring Bouquet 6 cube set to stamp up my sentiment. I'm going to use limeade on this card front. To help this pop a little bit more without creating a sentiment strip, I'm going to apply lime just to the bottom half of the stamp by sort of angling my ink cube in a 45-degree angle and pushing to the bottom of the stamp to give myself this sort of gradient that runs along the bottom of the sentiment. There is one thing I forgot to finish on the main flower image, which was stamp the center of the flower. So I'm using Mango Smoothie for the most solid layer. Then I'm going to use Peach Perfect on the detail cluster for the center of this flower. So before I mount this card onto my folded note card base, I'm going to add just a little bit of splatter. Now, the nice thing about splatter, and which is why I like to do it so often, is that once you create a clustered or off-center focal point, you can sort of spread out your image artificially by adding in this splatter to sort of make it stretch out across your card front without adding other embellishments onto your card. So I'm going to use my favorite Jet Black ink spray and dilute it with a little bit of water. And now for this clean and simple card, I won't do too much splatter. I'll do just enough to frame the sentiment and the flower. To add just a little bit of splatter around the sentiment and maybe on the bottom right side of the flower. And for me, that is just enough to make it still look like a clean and simple card, but one that also stretches out to the other portions of your card front so that it just doesn't look so plain. One of the hardest things in my mind to control about clean and simple cards. And once that card front dries back, I can adhere it to my notes card base. And that finishes my clean and simple card. Now as a recap, I made a guide that's 4 1/4 by 1 7/8 inch, or roughly 1/3 of the surface area of my card front, as a template to arrange or pre-arrange my card front and focal point elements. This guide is intended to make clean and simple card arrangements easy to arrange on your card front so that you have the perfect ratio of stamped elements to white space on your card front. My series encourages you to shop your existing Altenew stash and rekindle their love with newer releases. Perfect Pairings with Jaycee airs on the Altenew channel every second and fourth Sunday of the month. Please make sure you like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much for tuning in to this Perfect Pairing episode with me, and I'll see you in the next one.
Hello crafters, Jen here. For more tips, techniques, tutorials, and to discover which paper crafting products are right for you, subscribe to Altenew's YouTube channel. Make sure to hit the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. Thanks for watching.